Hello, video time. So this video, oh, excuse me, I just got out of the shower. So this video is called that we need to rebuild Rome because that would fix all of our historical problems. It would be like going back in time. It would be the best thing that we could do to go back in time and fix what went wrong, pretend that Rome never fell, and then reestablish the rule of law that we broke because we lost Rome. Because I've been studying the history of Rome lately. I listened to Mike Duncan's podcast, History of Rome. Before that, I was listening to The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and now I'm listening to History of the Byzantine Empire. And I'm also creating Rome in 3D on Google Earth when it was at its height until, I guess, after the Baths of Diocletian. I think the Baths of Diocletian were made in like 260 or something like that. When were the Baths of Diocletian made? Well, yeah, anyway, I won't look at that now, but yeah, so and the Aurelian Wall, because the Aurelian Wall was put up in like 260, so it was kind of like, it was still as high. So we'll say 1,000,000 people within the Aurelian Wall, unless any historians object, and just count them out person for person exactly. I read that they did it in 10 weeks, the other guys that did it, but they had to take it away because contractual problems or whatever. But it took them 10 weeks, and so if I take 10 weeks, I'll be done at the beginning of February, so I guess I'll shoot for beginning of February. But yeah, if you can account, what you do is you just build, rebuild the city, and then you account for what size of rooms, and then you count for how many people you'd have to put in those rooms to arrive at 1,000,000, and there you go. You can account for everybody's census, and and if you don't, and if it's too unrealistic because you have too many people for a room, you just increase the percentage of apartment buildings that are 5 stories. But yeah, it'll be interesting to make big tall ones. But we need to rebuild it in real life because you learn things about Rome when you actually walk around how it was then in the past. And it'll unlock your past life memories and our natural instincts. And we'll notice things, and we'll become more interested in history. It'll become the greatest tourist trap of all time. When I was there in '97, I think they were doing work because I think it was covered in scaffolding, the Colosseum, and so yeah. But we should continue and you can rebuild all that stuff and allow the original part to still show, so it's still you're still looking at the real thing, and just bringing it back to life how it was then, and with all of it, and the whole thing. I'm struck by it would be a great tourist place because its infrastructure was designed perfectly for that anyway. I was struck by how many race courses and race tracks and theaters there are. If everybody thinks of Rome, you think of the Colosseum and the Circus Maximus, but if you really look at it, like what I'm doing, you see a bunch of Colosseums and a bunch of Circus Maximi. I think there's like at least 3 that I can think of Circus Maximuses, big ones, and maybe more. And then there's a whole bunch of theaters, yeah, and then they had 11 baths, giant baths, and then I think it was 1,600 private ones. So it was party central. So just bring that back. Like if you're gonna build your ultimate like world central area nowadays, and some genius were to, think of the coolest design, it would pretty much be ancient Rome how it was. Uh, it's designed to jam pack people in to live there, so that'd be good to keep the numbers high of tourists there. Uh, it's also purely pedestrian, and so you wouldn't want to allow any cars in it. It's also small enough to be just fine for pedestrians, or maybe people with bikes. It's the Aurelian walls are smaller than Boulder. They're like half the size of Boulder. It's only 12 miles in circumference, and so and it's beautiful because it has 7 hills, big hills. So as when you're on top of the buildings, on top of the hills are beautiful too. They're temples, and so when you're on top of these big temples, you can see all the other temples on top of the other hills, and everything way below you, and you can look down into all these different racetracks from above, and it's just gorgeous. I'm going to show it when I'm done in a few months. So to bring all that back to life would be the greatest place to have, world symposiums. We will perfect with social media networking, sharing our ideas online and networking that way, but we'll always want to have the most beautiful and effective way to bring people together uh, in real life. And so Rome is a good way because the Colosseum held 100,000, 50,000 people, the Circus Maximus 100. There are a whole bunch of different uh, theaters, so it's like a giant college campus, and people are already trying to rebuild Rome right now, um, bringing it back to its roots by getting rid of all the franchise restaurants and stuff. So uh, now I want to talk about why it'd be good to bring back Rome, as far as the culture, because when I was studying the history of Rome, I was thinking about why did Rome fall? Why did the Empire of Rome fall? And the Empire of Rome fell because people went slack on rule of law, and they went slack on the respect for education and democracy. The Roman Empire started to fall when it became more of just a big army that wasn't really centered in Rome, but centered around wherever the emperor was. And then it just became a bunch of soldiers and then, there was less and less power in Rome, the city, and less influence. And then they just uh, neglected it until it just got destroyed. As I was listening to the history of Rome, I was thinking to myself what the Romans in its heyday would have thought about if they were to time travel into the future, and then have your local modern historian tour guide to bring you through Rome. I think the reaction of most of the Romans, educated, and all of the Romans from the time of 200 AD when I'm building Rome, they would be horrified, you know, and they would probably even be horrified as to why we wouldn't be horrified. It'd be like somebody going off and leaving your mother with or your child with somebody, or your car, and saying, "Take care of my nice Ferrari. I'm gonna go on vacation," and then you come back and they're like, "Yeah, how's my Ferrari? Oh, it's doing great," um, because it's just a hand me down from a hand me down. You look at it and it's all beat up, but they don't understand because they didn't see it when it was good. So, yeah, because it is mangled. I mean, after Rome was built beautifully with all those things, and then just a couple hundred years later, it just started to crumble. And the year it started to shrink. And then and then the emperor left it. And then the year after the fall of the Western Empire, and I think it was 526, there were Goths. The Goths had taken over Italy, so they were being besieged by some Vandals or somebody, and they dismantled the aqueduct. And it was never rebuilt, and so that had to reduce the population by a lot. If that had been a civil war, like in 0 BC between Caesar and Pompey or something, they wouldn't have dismantled the aqueducts, But I think so. It was an erosion in the respect for the city itself when they left the city. So that's another thing. They never should have left the city. And so, but the cause of that is, I think, because they lost respect for the city as a cultural center. If you listen to the history of Rome from Livy, it's a great. Livy is the history of Rome book that covers from the beginning of Rome, the culture with Alba Longa in like 1180 BC. And then he takes it all the way up until, I think the last books of Livy were lost. So he takes it up until like the end of the wars with the Volsci or something in like 150 BC or something like that. But it's a very beautiful history book because it reads kind of like a Bible, like a kind of like a constitution, like a manual for how to have a great society, because of it's written down. It's kind of like a edited version of all of the important stuff, written out concisely, because it's written out by memory, because the Romans did have a written history, but in 396 BC, the Gauls came down and sacked Rome, and when they were doing that, before they got kicked out, they destroyed all of the history books of Rome, and so they had to rewrite the history of Rome. What's that? 1180 BC all the way down to 390, so 311, like 700 years or 800 years of history by memory. So and it's still a pretty big book, like 750 pages, but all by memory. So they remembered all the good parts and made it a tale that was very like this utopian perfect city that grew up. And so one thing that they stress in the book is that in their history, is that their second king, Numa Pompilius, is just as important as their first king. The first king, Romulus, started the city, and he got the army together and defeated others people in battle, and incorporated other tribes, Sabines, and made the original constitution. Man, my mouth is totally dry. I have to drink some water. My tongue is bone dry. Okay. Yeah. So, but the second king that they had, Numa Pompilius, came from the Sabine tribe. He didn't even want to be king, but they made him king because he was a scholar, and so he made all of these sacred rules and like new gods. I think he was the one who came up with their boundary god, and the temples and the fire. They have when their war temple doors are open if they're not in battle, and they made the city into a cultural center where they continued to invite uh, single people who wanted to make something of themselves from around, and um, like a meritocracy based place. Uh, and yeah, so when they abandoned Rome as a cultural center, I think that was one of the seeds for the destruction of the city of the whole empire, because uh, and people even that was a commonly held fact that I think they had, and they just let go of it. There's a saying, um, Rome is the center of the world. When Rome falls, the whole world falls. And so just keep Rome alive, and you can kind of keep that hope of society alive. And because the whole uh, mission statement for Rome, the uh, constitution, original idea of Rome that made it so successful, was the idea of everything about the Roman Empire was about Rome. It was all about protecting Rome, but that was good for the empire. The best thing for an empire is to have one capital that is always the capital and always protected no matter what, and that's what they abandoned. When the Greeks would make their new cities, their new colonies, the colonies would be sent out. Uh, for lots of reasons like trading or overpopulation, trying security. But they would have their sister city, which would be under them, would be directed by them. But then once the city got strong enough, it would become independent. But that didn't really allow for a lot of Greek unity. Uh, they would just fight each other, and with Rome, it grew out from the actual central city, and that always had the power. And that was because Rome had that idea from the very beginning. Um, Athens was the city that came the closest to that, but they didn't have that central idea from the beginning. Athens was just another city state. And then they were kind of like the bank for the confederacy of all of the Greeks, and then they abused it, and they had a war. So Rome was better because they made it very clear from the beginning that they had their cultural center that was Rome, and these were the rules, um, and and they made it clear that it was successful because of its democratic nature. Um, and when you read the history of Rome, they make that very clear that the kings that were democratic were the best, and the ones that were the most authoritative were the worst. Um, they said like the Catulus, the last king, was bad because he increased the Senate with just people he knew. Um, but the other kings that were good for him, and increased the Senate to make it more democratic. It's hard to explain, but the dichotomy between that. But yeah, and what of a benefit it was for Rome to become a republic, and that they made a vow even to kill anybody who tried to become king, and and so Rome was this kind of protector of civilization, and they valued um, people of merit, and who followed the law and didn't abuse the law, like their Cincinnatus. They were about to have a war with the Volscians, and they needed a leader. So they brought a leader who they had punished and who had a reason to hate them because they banished his son, Cincinnatus, who was a exile, general, but he was the best general. So they got him, and they said they made him dictator, and he won the war. But after he won the war, he could have taken power, but he decided he gave the power back to the people and went back to his farm. And so he was hailed as a king, or a leader after that. And so when Rome strayed from that and went back to the traditional barbaric way of might makes right, of the soldiers, people valuing power over the culture, then it starts to deteriorate. And you can really see that play out with the decline of the Byzantine Empire, where people just were trying to invade other countries to try to regain their what they thought they deserved because they had it in the past, or fighting each other and killing each other just because they wanted to have power over the country. You know, those people probably weren't sitting around talking about uh, the values of the original Romans, like the democratic leanings um, of the 12 tablets and the Senate. And so that's why, if you would bring one of these Romans, educated Romans from the year 200, to see Rome now, they'd be horrified. Because it just got mangled. The aqueducts got destroyed. Um, and then all the buildings went into disuse. The Colosseum was used as a barracks, as like a castle. They were dismantling all the buildings like the Colosseum to build other houses. They turned Hadrian's mausoleum into a castle. And even before the fall of Rome in the year 410, all of the ancient mausoleums got sacked when the gods came down. And so because they didn't follow the rule of law, and well, when they came in. But yeah, so I think if you were to ask anybody alive today, what's the best thing about Rome? Like, what's the most amazing historical city? Rome. Why is Rome the most amazing historical city? Because it has the most ruins from the longest ago. So the essence of civilization, what those people in the past, all of them should have said, and which they should have had written in stone, is that the goal of society is to protect Rome. Literally, like um, that's what the original founding fathers of Rome had actually written in their constitution. That when it grows out, it's Rome growing out. There's the city of Rome, but then it's the city, the country, the empire of Rome, and all those other cities are kind of like every road leads to Rome, the eternal city. Um, and and but but it got destroyed, and I mean, we almost lost all of it. We and they had, but yeah, but like I was saying, I kind of lost my train of thought. They had the right idea to try to make it eternal. The Severan plan that I'm making my map of Rome on right now was etched in stone on marble up on it was 30 feet by 30 feet up on the side of the inside wall of the temple on the top of the Esquiline Hill. The most like the citadel, in sense, the most safe place they can imagine to try to preserve time. Etch it in stone, and etching tablets in stone has a long history. The Vatican Library, has a long history of trying to preserve culture and building all their cities, their buildings in stone, with their famous Roman cement that they created. They were the first, creators of your cement city. That's probably the main thing that people would notice when they think about Rome. I was actually kind of getting that impression when I was building on Google Earth, how they just cementized, the world, and that's how the first people and that's how we live now. In the past, they'd have tribes who would, like the wagon circle. You all make a circle, and with your opening in the center to protect, and the tribe out. You would have your huts in the center, the paved area where the children would play, and when you look at Tiberius's house, it's just this big, his room in the middle, surrounded by 60 rooms that all face towards the center. So it's like this, it's like you could, and when they would incorporate tribes, that's probably what they did, go out in the woods and get these tribesmen out in the woods in their little huts, in their little donut huts, and be like, here, we have a building for you. Bring them into a building. It's just a cement building with all these buildings, rooms all facing in, and in the same shape. Kind of like how the Romans, when they would build their legionary camps, they would make it in the same exact formation every time. So no matter where they were on the map, even if they hiked 20 miles a day, they always had their town, and it was the same town, the whole town of 3,000, 6,000 people, and the streets in the same place. And yeah, so yeah, so yeah, so to rebuild Rome itself, just the way it is before, it would bring back all of the memories and be like, oh yeah, Rome. And then we would remember the value of preserving culture, and because we would mourn all the culture that we lost, and thank how much culture we saved. We almost lost Rome. That 30-foot by 30-foot etched in stone marble wall and the temple that I was talking about, that was built by Septimus Severus, the first of the soldier emperors, but this was the guy after Commodus. There was Commodus, and who was the bad emperor after the 5 good emperors, and then there were like 4 emperors in a year, general emperors fighting, and then there was Severus, who was for 20 years and 18 years, and he had a great term. But he was the guy who built this plan, the Severan plan, but it got destroyed. Like Rome literally fell, it crumbled. People just didn't care. They stopped doing the games, and that temple crumbled, and it was just a pile of rubble. That wall that they tried to preserve was a pile of rubble, but luckily they etched it in stone, and so somebody picked up the piles and stacked it behind the church, behind the wall, in one of the nooks, and it got lost to time, and then they found the pile of it in 1526 or something, and identified it, and pieced it together in the 1750s, and then in 1840, this Italian architect put the pieces together. It was like 1,000 pieces from this big wall that they pieced together, and they only managed to piece together 10% of it. But with that 10%, that our Italian architect in the 1840s managed to kind of guess what the rest of the building would look like and piece it together. And so we pieced together most of Rome. And so based from what he made, I can then guess what the rest of it would look like, and then fill the rest of the million people in. And boom, we managed to forensically recreate ancient Rome when we came that close to losing it. And so, luckily, because of the foresight of the people who were trying to make Rome the eternal city and put that wall up, etched in stone. Luckily, we have our Rome, but yeah, it would break their hearts, I think, to see how much it just crumbled. It went down to 15,000 people in the Middle Ages, and so people were just taking bits and pieces of the buildings off for 1,000. It fell in like 410 is when it first started to crumble. So it's fallen for 1,500 years until now, when we finally are able to have our civilization together enough to protect it legally. When I went there in '97, I walked from the Colosseum to the baths of Caracalla, I think it was, and I was walking and I looked on the boulevard area in the middle of the road, and there were just like pieces of column just laying in the dirt that had just been laying there, for the last 2,000 years, that people hadn't managed to cart off yet. But if the Middle Ages had lasted another 500,000 years, people would have carted all of those off. It was dissolving slowly. Even in World War II, we were bombing Rome and destroyed stuff. We destroyed in World War II the boats of Nero that they dug up, these giant boats. And we could have them now, but they got destroyed in bombing. So, and now people in the Middle East have been destroying stuff that's 5,000 years old. And so our ancestors are going to, the primary thing for our ancestors is to preserve what we have, so that we can give them a culture and also give them a legacy, because culture, the general zeitgeist, the general hive mind of everybody, subconscious agreement that we all have, is that we have the more of a culture, of an ancient culture that we have, and the more of a history of following the rule of law and of a positive, strong culture we have, the more the stronger, the healthier our culture is going to be now, because it slowly builds over time. And so yeah, I mean, I think what I want to do is judge every single decision that every single politician made in ancient Rome, and say, okay, that was a bad policy, that was a bad decision, and so that we don't make those kinds of decisions again. And so one of the worst decisions that they made was leaving the actual city of Rome, abandoning the city. It's kind of like the gods, your gods of Rome. Well, what does abandoning your gods mean? Well, it means is abandoning your culture and abandoning your original city. When the original Christians, Theodosius, created his Christianity, made Christianity, killed Christianity, and made Christianity the official religion of the empire. They did it wrong by destroying paganism. You don't have to destroy paganism, all the old gods, in order to have one God for everybody. You can keep all of your old gods and your old temples and stuff, and statues, and just honor the one religion with the one God. Like you could, if there were the people in Syria who worship Sol Invictus, the sun god, and then the Jews down in Jerusalem worshipped Jehovah. They're one God for them. And then so people naturally would have come to the idea of just having one God for the empire, and they wouldn't have. They would have not destroyed their culture. They wouldn't have outlawed the Olympics and abandoned all of the racetracks and theaters, and they wouldn't have torn down all the statues and temples, and sterilized their society. And when you sterilize your society, you're sterilizing thousands of years of culture, of built up rules of law, people's ability to and reputation to honor their word and their beliefs. And yeah, I think and the iconoclasm also, when they were just tearing down stuff. I think one of the reasons is the one thing connected to that, one cause of that is when they stopped valuing their history and their culture, and that's related to their loss of literacy. I'm really high right now, by the way. Yeah, so what they should have done is just protected literacy, protected a democracy, and never left Rome. And because when you study the history of Rome, you learn that nobody wanted Rome to fall. When when the barbarians came in, they just wanted to be given a place to be inside the Roman Empire, but they were but then they kept getting attacked, so they just pissed him off, and then they attacked Rome and lost respect for Rome and destroyed all the mausoleums. But they weren't trying to destroy the empire, and the empire wasn't destroyed until 76 years later. It was sacked in 410. It wasn't destroyed, overthrown in 476. And when it was overthrown, it was because, like, the Roman Empire itself crumbled. It wasn't destroyed. Their tax system was out of whack. They were people, all the rich people, aristocracy, were just looking out for themselves. And I don't want to explain it right now, but it was kind of like all of the barbarians moving into Rome was more like a revolution than an actual overthrow of like enemy countries. Rome had just lost its own ability to value its own rule of law, its own culture. They kept overthrowing each other, overthrowing the whoever was emperor, and then stabbing each other in the back, and basically doing stuff that you would have, people who you would imagine never had have memorized Livy, and even though they valued that, they just didn't really understand or care. People fell into greed. But I mean, that's kind of the main mystery about the fall of Rome. I remember when I was a kid, the general consensus that everybody said was, well, Rome fell because they had lead in their pipes, and now when I think about it, I'm like, well, yeah, that must have been it, because there really is no explanation. It was just, if you think about the history of Rome, you see this perfectly healthy world culture that everybody wants to survive, but all the people in charge are just making all of these all of the wrong decisions over and over again. Clearly selfish decisions, doing stuff just for them, like civil wars going on. Even if, and a lot of the times they're doing it to save their own skin, but if people go off to war and risk their lives, then why wouldn't you sacrifice your own life for the good of the empire? There's not that many stories. So so the only explanation that is left is they're just being idiots. And why were they being idiots? So, well, it must be some kind of biological thing. Must have been the lead in the water, or the lead pipes, which made them aggressive and crazy. There's even a theory now that people became a lot less violent crime now than in the 80s, because we got rid of the lead and the gas. So if you want to fix the past, go back in time and fix. I mean, you can't go back in time, but I think you can kind of figuratively do that. Like a perfectionist would, or a very well-run operation, kind of like, I guess, maybe like the military style run operation is run like, if anything goes wrong, then you change something, even if it appears to be just a random thing, you just strengthen the security, Like if I'm working on Google Earth and I'm building something and I lose stuff because I didn't save it and then the computer crashed, then I just need to save it more frequently from now on. I actually consciously changed something. And so that's what, kind of lost my train of thought. But that's what, they should have done. Oh yeah, and so they should have had a really strong constitution constantly explaining rules in order to avoid that stuff. And so what we should do is rewrite the Roman Constitution, like write the Constitution of what we think that like the smartest Roman that lived then would have written. And and so we have even no reason to believe that they didn't write that, because so much stuff was lost that you could look at it as just a historian recreating history. You could basically, I mean, you say that you made it up, but you could pretend like, because this is the best example that you have, that, oh yeah, you found this under a rock somewhere in Rome, under a column. Voila, here's the ancient constitution, lost constitution of Rome that they didn't follow. That you could imagine somebody wrote who lived at that time. Like thou shalt not, like, yeah, you should kill anybody who tries to become king, and don't ever let anybody. But the problem is they kept killing each other, the kings, and then the new king was a king. So they needed to keep it a democratic. Now, contemplating if it's possible to democratically run an entire empire in those days with the technology they had is another story that I didn't prepare myself to talk about now, and I guess you can't. But so even when they had to separate it and turn it into just an army run by one guy, he should have stayed in Rome. Like when they moved the capital up to the north and somewhere else, they should have just made it like another big fortification up in Byzantium, Constantinople, and they never should have moved up to Milan. You can just have, if you're more of a democratic culture, you could just have another general up there manning Milan and fighting the, Germans. But yeah, so yeah, and like various things to like I would have written, don't try to, if you have below a certain, and even have an exact number, a certain population density, if it goes under a certain population density in a certain area, then abandon. Like what God Terminus says is to abandon that area, and then bring all of your citizens from that area into the new area retracted. So now you have enough soldiers in a small area, and just tear down the walls and build new walls to protect. And also make a rule then that says of all the different cleanliness things that you have to do to keep everything clean, so that you don't ever have a plague and have a population problem. Because that's kind of what allowed the fall of Rome. Rome was doing great, and then in the 160s, it had the Antonine Plague, which killed off. I was just watching this documentary here on Netflix, because my mom got it recently, but 2,000 people a day on the city of Rome were dying. And so there weren't enough people in the actual empire. That the barbarians get word of that, and they're constantly being pressured down here into Rome from their civil wars. And so they should have had a policy like, if you don't have enough population, then they actually did have a policy. Bring the tribe down, but you have to break the tribe up and take their arms away, and then kind of scatter them all over the empire, so they don't have cohesive units of tribes. But they should probably have written in their constitution that they should have actively recruited tribes. Like right after the Antonine Plague, they should have sent delegates in and said, okay, we can take people. Just all the way down to the minute stuff. What we should do is rewrite it. And then kind of reimagine what the world could be like now if Rome had never have fallen, and how it would have been healthier in all the different ways, with all the more cultural unity, because that's what you want, is cultural unity, one world language and religion and all that kind of stuff through democratically, organically created from people. And yeah, so the best way, so if we can have a consensus that we never should have abandoned the city of Rome, and every single thing that was built in Rome was supposed to have been built there to stay there forever. Like Nero tearing down stuff or building his big palace. They shouldn't have torn down his palace and built something. Well, I guess they tore it down to build the Colosseum, so that's good. But yeah, people shouldn't have never torn stuff down. I mean, the Byzantines went down and tore off the copper from the Pantheon in the like 600s or something, So just because he wanted extra money to invade the Bulgars, just because they took their land, they shouldn't have tried to take their land back. They took their land, they were retracting cities, so they went attack them, and then the Bulgars stole their copper. So they stole it off Romans stole their own copper off the Pantheon and handed it over to the barbarians. I mean, so yeah, they should have their main object shouldn't have been at that point expand more, try to regain the territory that you had lost, but protect Rome and protect what you have. And so, yeah, and we can bring all those lessons that we rewrite from the old Constitution of Rome to our present world, and then use those as rules to live by. Yeah, so if we're gonna make it right again, and acknowledge, actually officially acknowledge, because that's the way to make it. That's how we make stuff real in our minds, culturally, where we all agree on it, and then we all move in cohesion and speak the same language and think the same thoughts and have peace, is when we write it into law. And so what we should write into law is that was all. We never should have abandoned Rome, and so that if we never should abandon Rome, we need to pretend that we didn't abandon or build it back up. So we need to actually physically rebuild it. That's the reasoning. That's why we need to rebuild physically Rome, how it was then, with the intention of never, like in perfect quality, just like it was then. The best, all reinforced with concrete to withstand as long as we can. And then that will be our world's symbol for civilization. Like if aliens come down from the beyond in 500 years, say we're alone for another 500 years, and the aliens finally come down. The aliens say, take us to your leader, take us to your capital. Where would we want to take them? We would want to take them to a place that's beautiful, has a capacity for a lot of people, and a lot of oriented for a lot of symposiums, people presenting to a lot of people in person where you can hear them, and so lots of pantheons, lots of racetracks, all pedestrian. You'd want to take them to Rome. Perfect place. And then, of course, you'd want it to be an ancient place where that you could brag that it came from an ancient time long ago because you have an ancient culture. And then you could give the whole history of Rome from the very beginning. And then say, oh yeah, it crumbled and we lost our empire, but we rebuilt our Rome, and then we rebuilt our empire, And then Rome can become the symbolic capital. And then, in a lot of ways, Rome Empire never fell. They brought the Pope back. The Pope became popular, and then so he was powerful. And then even in the year 800, even though the Roman Empire had officially moved to Constantinople, the Pope in Rome, who was just the main Christian leader, but now he had the authority from being the main leader of the Roman Empire, because from the very beginning, from Numa Pompilius, he created the office of Pontifex Maximus, the main political leader or religious leader of Rome, who made the religious rules, who had as much power as the general, And so there was bringing back, they had as much claim, or more claim actually, to the Roman Empire than the Byzantines did, because they actually lived in the city and they had their office that went back to 756 BC. So when the Pope said, okay, so now we have the Roman Empire again, and you're the emperor, to Charlemagne, who's from France, the Byzantines, they had the official, legal inheritance, but they didn't. But they didn't really have any more claim than the French, because of the Pope, because of that ancient office. So, but you see that when you study history, time and time again, people, like the Byzantines, they rely on their reputation and their lineage and their history. And so, if you rebuild Rome, you could bring it all back to life, literally. And then you go and you walk around Rome, and then you'll have your past life memories. And then but it's the perfect design to rebuild a city, because there are so many. I was struck by how many theaters there are. But I think one reason they abandoned Rome, these soldier emperors, is because Rome became decadent. It became the center where all the money went, all because it was the center of the empire. And even after the emperors left and were living other places, it still was the symbol of it. So it was still fabulously wealthy. Diocletian never even went to Rome until he was emperor for like 20 years. But he had baths built there, who were just as big as the biggest baths that were ever built there. So, even he was paying into a place he didn't even really like. And he went there and didn't even like it. He left, and because it was too decadent, people were just into the races. And so, yeah, so they Rome was just, you could see from the architecture, it's just I mean, if one Circus Maximus is enough or two is enough, you make three all because they're racing all day long. So they must have had, well, I mean, well, which exactly which of the big races they had, huge banquets, and they had a whole bunch of them. I mean, Commodus killed like 200 lions, once, and they did that a lot. So it was decadent, and so that kind of put a bad taste in the mouth of people, and so Rome, and so yeah, we should rebuild the. We can use that as a lesson to when we rebuild Rome, not make it a place that's just all about watching the same fabulously wealthy chariot racers, some of the richest people who ever lived, chariot racers from Rome, racing over and over again, and like you know, a small number of people speaking. You could use it as a democratic thing where lots of different people are racing, and lots of different people are speaking. Anyway, yeah, so that's what we should do, rebuild Rome physically. I'm rebuilding Rome on top of Boulder to even learn Rome even more, like in the same exact area. Have every single building in ancient Rome in its place here in Boulder, so that when you go to spatially, so that you understand what Rome looked like from understanding it spatially. This far to this thing and this far over here, and I think you'll get a feel for what it was like just by knowing the sheer number of things that they had. I was also struck by how many temples they had all over the place. So yeah, I mean, so if you were to talk to somebody who moved into the future, the things that I would expect them to tell me, like if I were to talk to Cicero and he would say, or Augustus, or I were to talk to Augustus and he were to be like, tell me what he thought. Oh no, the Rome fell. Okay, let me tell you what I think happened. Or Marcus Aurelius. They'd be like, I'd be like, yeah. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. They should have. They should never have torn down. Like when one time Rome was being besieged, and I think it was the 700s. They were throwing statues down, ancient statues from the walls of Rome and all the buildings down on top of the invading army, using it as weapons, the statues. And, that was because they lost their culture, because all of that's why the Goths came down, because they weren't the same culture. They weren't Romans, and they didn't care. And they'd lost their respect for Romans because they got beat, but, and they were being mismanaged. So yeah, so what they would say is, yeah, you need to value the Senate, and educated people, and because it's disgusting. I would have been disgusted, and I'm sure Augustus would have been disgusted. All the people collectively who cared more for whether their team was going to win in that chariot race, as though it was going to matter in 1,000 years, than protecting protecting the Severan plan. So that people in 2,000 years would know what Rome even looked like. For 1,000 years, from 500 to 1,500, they didn't even know what Rome looked like. Rome was just this ancient city with all a ruin here and a ruin there. But yeah, so just to cultivate the study of history, because that cultivates the respect for tradition, and but the best way to cultivate respect for history is to rebuild history physically. And then you can turn Rome into, because the technology we have now, you could rebuild Rome and pack 1 million people like they had them then in that area, inside the 12-mile circumference Antonine Wall, but Aurelian Wall, but and then they could understand what it was like and why all those people lived there. I mean, they must have really loved Rome. If they must have been entertaining if they'd pack all those people there, but they could understand and it wouldn't be that uncomfortable because you could build it out of modern building materials. So the thickness of the wall, you can use that to just use as storage to put your stuff in. So you could put as many people in those rooms and not have their luggage get in the way, or and then put underground, maybe put basement buildings in there, but but and ventilation and all that would work out. But it's pretty much the same. It's modern. We'd fit right in. I walked around the Coliseum from back then when I was in '97, and I felt like I was in a modern Coliseum. And it was the same Coliseum that was built 2,000 years ago. I was inside of it on the second floor, walking around on the inside, on the ring platform. And then you go out and you see the center, and yeah, it would have been just like back then. That would have been the most amazing. If you'd give me 5 minutes to hang out in ancient Rome, I'd want to go to the Colosseum. In ancient history anywhere, I'd want to go to the Colosseum and walk around the Colosseum when something was going on. Okay, so I think I babbled long enough. That's why, an hour. That's why we should, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. That's why we should rebuild Rome physically. And I mean, I said that to my mom, and she's like, that's impossible. How are you going to rebuild the whole city? Well, you don't rebuild it now. You just rebuild it over the course. You think about it for 100 years, just like because it's the culture. You just let the culture grow. So you talk about it, and then you rebuild the Colosseum, then you rebuild the Forum, and then you just rebuild the wall, and then you rebuild Rome. So we should at least, the more we talk about it, the more likely we can make it possible. So rebuild the Colosseum. All right, peace out. I mean, rebuild Rome. But first we have to rebuild Rome on Google Earth, so that's what I'm doing. I'll be done at the beginning of February. Okay, peace out.